The following program is being presented by Cablevision as a public service. The views and opinions expressed on the program are those of the program's producers and/or those of the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Cablevision.
על הניסים ועל הבורקן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות על הניסים ועל הבורקן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented under the auspices of the Suffolk Jewish Communal Planning Council and the Conference of Jewish Organizations of Nassau County, New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every other month, we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community. And today we'll be exploring the future of the conservative movement in Judaism. In the last decade or so, there have been a number of major changes in the conservative movement, not the least of which has been the recent ordination of a woman. And here to help explore that topic is that woman, this Rabbi Amy Eilberg, a Vice Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And it should be noted that the ordination of women and a number of changes that have taken place have not been without some divisiveness in the conservative movement among a number of conservative Jews, and just to help explore that aspect is sitting next to Rabbi Schachter, Dr. Miriam Klein Shapiro. She is a member of the executive board of the Union for Traditional Conservative Judaism and an education specialist with Board of Jewish Education of Greater New York. And seated next to her is Rabbi Bruce Ginsberg, and he is vice chairman of the Union for Traditional Conservative Judaism and spiritual of the Bethpage Jewish Community Center. Let me first begin by asking you, Rabbi Eilberg, why you wanted to become, you grew up in a conservative home, why you wanted to become a woman, become a rabbi in a religion that really didn't have women rabbi in the conservative movement.
Mm-hmm. I think I first formulated the plan to become a rabbi as any young man might have. That is to say, I had my Judaism had become a very important part of my life from my early teens, at least. By the time I entered college, I was sure that I would want to bring my Judaism into the professional arena as well, that I was planning a career already in Jewish education. I think it was then, during my college years, well, partially because I was in a college community which was very supportive of women's growing and developing their own professional and spiritual aspirations, but also because I began to do a great deal of reading in the founding ideological documents of the conservative movement. And the more I understood the ideological principles on which the movement was based, the more it seemed to me that this movement, if it was to be true to itself, would have to find a way to accommodate the feminist challenge in a meaningful way. And it was at that time, I think, that I began to believe that it would eventually come to be that the movement would be prepared to ordain a woman rabbi.
Do you think that because you are the first woman rabbi in the conservative movement, that you have a special responsibility?
I suppose that perhaps I do. As I've experienced it so far, I've had a special privilege in that I've had particular access to many of the aspirations and dreams and frustrations of particularly women, but more generally women and men around the country, many of whom, people that I'd never met, have flooded with letters after the news broke that I was to be ordained. And as I move around the country speaking in community after community, people come up to me, and the language that they use in their congratulatory messages indicates to me that they're really telling me something about their own feelings about themselves, their own desire to contribute their energies in various ways to the life of the community. So that it's been a very moving experience for me to hear about other people. But if, to the extent that I'm called on to be a sort of role model for those who come after me, I'm glad to be able to do that. When I was a young girl, of course, there were women role models, or at least role models of women who participated with full equality. So I'm happy that those who come after me will have models to whom to turn.
Rabbi Schachter, Rabbi Eilberg said that she received a lot of congratulatory letters and telegrams. Was there any negative response to the seminary?
Well, of course there was. Our fellow guests on the program are proof of that. This is an issue which was debated long and very hard at the seminary, and clearly it produced some divisiveness from the very start. What I would like to say, though, Stewart, is that the movement within the conservative movement, the ordination of women, is not a recent one at all. This is really a culminating step of a process which must be at least a half-century old within the conservative movement. We have been moving in the direction of female equality within our understanding of the practice of Judaism from the time many, many years ago, at least a half-century ago, when the most noticeable act of separation, namely actual separation physically between males and females in public worship, was broken by the conservative movement, and what became known as mixed seating entered into the mainstream of the traditional observance of Judaism within the conservative movement. And that has been accompanied step by step by equalization of educational opportunity, equalization of the participation of women in the management of Jewish communal affairs, synagogue affairs, elected positions within synagogue lay leadership, a step-by-step kind of counterpart to what was happening in the world of expanding opportunity for women outside the framework of religion. If anything, we have been a little bit late coming to this final step, and when it came, it evoked both a great deal of support within the seminary community, within the conservative movement, and, as you correctly point out, opposition and divisiveness along with it.
Well, Dr. Shapiro, as Rabbi Schachter points out, the conservative movement has spoken of equality. They teach it in the Solomon Schechter day schools. Yet you find that there's something wrong with what? What aspect of it? Ordaining a woman, or mixed seating, or what?
Let me take that from three different views. The first is the sense in which you're using the word equality. Me, it is not equality for me as a feminist for you to tell me that I will be when I do what you do, and that what I do is not important. Those things which have been women's in Jewish tradition are looked on in Jewish tradition as equally important. They are reasons that women have been excused from certain other obligations, in the same way that, for instance, someone who has lost a loved one is excused from certain obligations because the things that they are doing are very important. What you're telling me is that what I do is not important, but what you do is so important that I'll be equal when I do the same thing. This message has been beamed out from the seminary. It has been beamed out from the establishment of the conservative movement. And I find that when I go places and speak, women come up to me, and I get floods of letters saying, we were waiting for someone to say that. We feel so put down by what they're doing, by saying this is equality for us, that they give us no credit for anything that is ours, but rather say, when we take on those things as men, then we'll be equal. We feel we've always been equal. But this sense of bandwagon, this is it, this is the feminist challenge. I don't believe, I'm a feminist, I don't believe the feminist challenge is as it's described. I believe the feminist challenge is to give me some sense of worth in myself as a woman and in those things which Judaism says that I do. And I have found a tremendous response from women all over the country who feel this way and are upset by this message being beamed out that they're not quite so good. And I must tell you, I don't think we're divisive, because it's really these people, the message that the Union for Traditional Conservative Judaism beams is enabling some of those people to stay within the movement. Many of them have said, we're the only voice within the movement, the one we're getting from the seminary today, we would leave. If there is any hope, it's with you for us to stay. If you succeed, we will stay. We are watching and waiting.
Well, Rabbi Ginsberg, as vice chairman of the union, let me ask you, is there a line that you are drawing? Do you say ordination of women is not what you will accept, but you will accept women being called to the Torah, women being included in the minyan? Or can you maybe define the line? Where are we drawing that line?
Okay, Miriam Shapiro just a moment ago explained that she sees herself as a Jewish feminist, and the truth is that a good number of the male members of the Union for Traditional Conservative Judaism would define themselves in the same way. We see ourselves as people who feel that Jewish women over the past decade and before have made some very, very important points, and they have to be addressed seriously. Certainly everybody in the Union would support education of women and to have them study the texts of our tradition, to assume positions of leadership in the Jewish community. And certainly, as was indicated before, we don't see the position we've taken as divisive at all. As a matter of fact, I would say personally that we could only congratulate Amy on her academic achievements and also see her involvement in communal life as a very positive and praiseworthy thing. However, we do see some real and definite and significant halakhic problems in terms of Jewish law. And we believe that this particular issue, that of the ordination of women, is simply an expression of a much deeper problem that we find in the conservative movement today. We're afraid that what we see is a drift away from our traditional moorings in rabbinic Judaism to something else. And we're concerned about that because we believe that while Jewish law has always evolved, Judaism has always been true to itself. It's always evolved in a context which is conducive to growth, one where people are halakhically observant, where Shabbat is observed and Kashrut is observed, and the laws of mikveh and other aspects of Judaism are emphasized. And we just fear that over the past decade, we've seen an obsessive concern with this particular issue, that of the ordination of women, which has deflected concern from what we believe are even more pressing priorities in the Jewish community.
And what about the women being called to the Torah and being counted in the minyan? Is that also something that you're...
The question of women being involved in a ritual is not a monolithic issue at all. Each and every item has to be weighed on its own merits. Women involved in Hakafot during Simchat Torah is one thing. Reciting Kiddush is another thing. Being counted in the minyan, reading Torah, and Aliyot of the Torah, each one is a separate issue and has to be weighed on its own merits. What I would indicate to you, to answer directly to your question, I believe those in the Union see the whole question of counting women in the minyan as a very definite halachic problem. We believe that back in 1973, when that decision was first issued by the Committee on Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly, this was already an indication of a departure from the traditional process of Jewish law, because it wasn't issued as a tshuva, as a rabbinic statement, but simply as a policy statement. We believe as conservative Jews that we should be structuring our future not on policy, but on a very careful analysis of Judaism based on the Mishnah and the Talmud, the ancient codes, to take a look at Judaism on its own terms and not be influenced by the biases of Western secularism.
Rabbi Schachter.